this follow-up to a previous story we talked about here on the channel. Shannon Courtenay has no intention of fighting Ebony Bridges for a second time unless Ebony gets her hands on a world title of her own. And, I thought about this. I thought to myself, I says, Shannon ought to fight Ebony for a second time because Shannon's really not ready for what else is out there. But if she's not going to be doing that...
that leaves the door open for other girls to chase her down.
Other girls that might perhaps have a lot more experience than young Ebony Bridges. Other girls like Shotgun Shannon O'Connell, who's in a pole position to challenge Shannon Courtenay for the WBA title as Shannon's mandatory challenger. That's right.
You don't fight Ebony, you might end up fighting Shannon.
And at this point in the juncture, are you sure you want to do that? You ain't got nowhere near the same level of experience as the other world champions at this weight. Any one of them might beat you. Shannon O'Connell, she might beat you as well.
Yeah, she might.
We've been all through that. What we're here to talk about now is where that leaves Ebony. If a rematch isn't in the immediate future between Ebony and Shannon, who does Ebony fight moving forward? I believe it was Nestor Gibbs of the Boxing Voice that put forward the name of America's own Melissa Oddessa. And that is an excellent fight. Sexy fucking fight. How likely it is to happen, that's another question entirely. You gotta understand, Melissa Oddessa comes from a deeper amateur background than Ebony does, and even as a professional.
She fought an active reigning world champion.
I think that gets glossed over because in the process of beating that active reigning world champion, Melissa didn't actually win that champion's world title. Some political issue.
The IBF told Melissa she needed more fights to fight for a world title.
I believe she was only 4-0 ahead of that Maria Cecilia Roman fight, an excellent fight, action-packed fight that was fought at just above the bantamweight limit, above 118 pounds. Just thus, the IBF bantamweight title wasn't on the line. And, Melissa got a lot of experience from that fight. And she showed her level against the reigning IBF bantamweight champion, Maria Cecilia Roman.
There's more going on here than what's on paper.
Yeah, Shannon might have 1 or 2 more professional fights than Melissa Oddessa does. And Ebony might only have a handful of fights, the same way Melissa's only got a handful of fights. But make no mistake,
Melissa's more experienced than both.
That's right. Yeah, Shannon Courtenay might be the reigning champion, but Melissa Oddessa is the one with the deeper amateur background and the better quality of competition as a professional as well. Maria Cecilia Roman is more experienced than Rachel Ball, who beat Shannon Courtenay, and she's more experienced than Ebony Bridges.
Maria Cecilia Roman's more experienced than Shannon and Ebony.
And Melissa Oddessa beat Maria Cecilia Roman.
That's her level.
It's where she is. For Ebony Bridges, a fight with Melissa is an excellent fight, but it's a high-risk, low-reward fight. Make no mistake, it's a very high risk.
I think Melissa's a high risk for everybody, to be honest.
I really do. And because of that, I don't see that fight between Ebony and Melissa materializing. I don't think. I think that there are other more winnable fights out there for Ebony Bridges, not exclusive to the Melissa Oddessa fight. One fight that comes to mind is a fight between Ebony and Shanika Johnson. Was very recently in action against Australia's own Shotgun Shannon O'Connell. Shotgun Shannon gave Shanika her first professional loss, and Shanika hasn't rebounded off that loss yet.
She's supposed to be back in action in October.
I think that's a fight that makes sense for Ebony because both Ebony and Shanika, in spite of Shanika having more professional fights than Ebony, they're both competing at a similar level. They both can learn a lot from each other. There's Shanika Johnson, who's going to be in action later on this year, in October. There's Russia's own Tatiana Zrazevskaya, who's going to be in action the month before, in September. And her countrywoman, Fatima Dudieva. And you want to watch out for these two, because these two have the potential to go on to become somebody's if left unchecked. They're the kind of fighters to where you want to get them now, before they get more professional experience and round out as fighters. Both Tatiana Zrazevskaya and Fatima Dudieva. There are experienced veterans like Giseth Noriega, who was very recently in action against Dina Thorslund, the reigning WBO champion at this weight. You can look at Giseth Noriega as an opportunity to garner experience as well.
Experience for Ebony.
And that's really the beauty of the women's bantamweight division, that it's a densely populated division, densely populated weight class with ample fighters to go around, some with more experience than others, but no shortage of them.
So Ebony can still get fights.
She can definitely still get fights if Shannon Courtenay doesn't want to give her the time of day, at least not in the immediate future. We know that Shannon, her fight with Jamie Mitchell, America's own Jamie Mitchell, that fight is getting postponed. Shannon suffered some kind of an injury, but she's still set to face Jamie in a few weeks' time. And beyond that, you have to wonder what she's going to do if she's not going to be fighting Ebony. Moreover, you have to wonder what Ebony's going to be doing if she's not going to be fighting Shannon.
These are a few of the names she can keep busy with.
We'll see what happens for Ebony beyond the Fight Camp series, where she's set to face the very game Beck Connolly. If Ebony can secure the W, we'll see if those talks with Shannon can't be revisited or if they can set up something else for her entirely. We'll see what happens. In other news, per tweet from Everything Boxing, Joe DeGuardia, representative of Joe Smith Jr. on Beterbiev Smith Talks, was quoted as saying, "We'd love to fight Beterbiev. Everyone, I try and make that fight. There is always a reason why they, Team Beterbiev, don't take it." And, I saw the reaction that these quotes from Joe DeGuardia got. A lot of people aren't buying it. This is a bona fide case of he said, she said. You're going to have Joe Smith Jr.'s side of the story, you're going to have Artur Beterbiev's side of the story, and then you're going to have the truth.
What's the truth, damn it?
Because a lot of people find this very hard to digest. We saw interest expressed in Top Rank in making the fight, and shortly after that, out of the clear blue sky comes an offer from Matchroom for Joe to face Danny Jacobs. That offer turns into another situation entirely, a two-fight situation that sees Joe Smith Jr. satisfying his mandatory Umar Salamov and starting off the following year with a Danny Jacobs showdown. Whose decision was that? Who's deciding to entertain Daniel Jacobs? I understand the reasoning. I understand the logic. I know it's a fight that can get attention as Daniel Jacobs is a bit more well-known, has been in more big fights than Artur Beterbiev. But if what you're saying is you tried to make the fight with Artur,
First.
we're going to need receipts.
Because Danny Jacobs is a much safer choice than Artur.
It's a much safer fight, and everybody knows that. We know that Daniel Jacobs had a lot of good fights at 160 pounds. We know that he eventually moved up to 168 pounds, and now he's going to try his hand at 175. We know that in Danny's last fight, he didn't look himself. He failed to impress. Looked rather underwhelming against Gabriel Rosado. Gabriel Rosado, who a lot of people think beat Daniel Jacobs.
Just giving it to you straight.
The only thing that Daniel Jacobs has on Artur Beterbiev would have to be his notoriety, his marquee value, because as far as where they are in their careers, Daniel appears to be a fighter who's on the back nine. You want my honest opinion? Big Joe Smith Jr., smoking Joe Smith Jr. He doesn't strike me as the kind of guy who's afraid of anybody. He doesn't. But that doesn't mean that his management don't have apprehensions of their own. They know what the risks are associated with an Artur Beterbiev fight, and even if they like their guys' chances, they're not going to take those risks on before they capitalize on other opportunities, like a Daniel Jacobs fight.
They're not going to take on those risks just yet.
Joe had that fight with Maxim Vlasov. Big guy, awkward guy, very elusive.
Yeah, he is.
And Maxim Vlasov, he's basically a cruiserweight on a diet. He's a guy who used to campaign up there at cruiserweight, decided to cut down all the way down to light heavyweight. He gave Joe a lot of problems. If you ask around, you're going to bump into one or two people that tell you they think Vlasov won the fight. Eye-opening fight for Joe, a wake-up call that Joe's on a tear. He has improved. He is getting better, but
Loss is always right around the corner in the sport of boxing.
so you make your money while you can. And I think that's what's going on here. If you want my honest opinion, I think the Joe Smith Jr. people, they like their guys' chances against Artur, but the Artur Beterbiev fight really is a much riskier fight than the Jacobs fight. So if you can make money satisfying your mandatory, and you can make more money fighting Daniel Jacobs, the Artur Beterbiev fight's not going anywhere.
Does that leave them open for criticism?
Yes, it does, because your guy, Joe DeGuardia, he's saying it's the other way around. He's saying he tried to make the Artur Beterbiev fight, but Beterbiev people, they didn't want to do it. When you're saying things like that, the boxing community, they're going to want to see receipts. They're going to want to see what you're talking about. When did you try to make the Artur Beterbiev fight? Because as far as we know, the people over there at Top Rank, platform where both of you guys fight, the banner, which both of you guys seem to fight under, they wanted to make that fight, and out of the clear blue sky comes Daniel Jacobs.
A 2-fight deal that caps off with him.
The look of it to the seasoned boxing fan, the one that's been following this division the last couple of years, they'll know Artur brings to the table the same kind of concussive punching power that Joe does, but Artur is a better boxer, comes from a better amateur background. And if what you're saying is that this guy ducked you and they didn't want to fight, a lot of people hearing this are going to want to see a lot of receipts, because all of this happened very quickly. The talks went from a potential in-house unification match on the top-ranked ESPN side of things to a 2-fight deal involving Joe's Mandatory and then Daniel Jacobs, who has yet to do anything at light heavyweight worth talking about. So, I don't know. Maybe Joe DeGuardia will produce those receipts and prove that what he's saying is true, or maybe he won't. A lot of people are going to hear this and think, well, that's a lot of bullshit.
We'll see how the story plays out.
In other news, the undercard for the upcoming Errol Spence versus Manny Pacquiao welterweight showdown appears to be set, and, it's nothing to write home about. It really isn't. Yordenis Ugas versus Fabian Maidana. For the guys that claim to have the welterweight market cornered, they aren't putting on that many titillating welterweight matches. Why are we seeing Ugas versus
Marcos Maidana's little brother?
Why not Ugas versus Thurman? When exactly is Keith Thurman going to make his ring return? Is he going to make his ring return? He does appear to be doing the rounds, doing interviews, talking about this and that, but as far as doing any actual boxing,
I don't know if he's in the business of doing that anymore.
What do you got? You got Victor Ortiz versus Robert Guerrero. A very past-it Victor Ortiz with the ghost of Robert Guerrero, Talk about
Bottom of the barrel.
Jamal James versus Radzab Butayev. I could have went for Thurman versus Jamal James at least. I look at this card.
There's no quality control.
None whatsoever. This is intended to be a high-profile fight, a high-profile card between Errol Spence Jr., the reigning unified welterweight champion, and the living legend, Manny Pacquiao. And as far as dolling up the card, as far as the undercard goes, what are we looking at?
A lack of quality control is what we're looking at.
Seriously, there doesn't appear to be any clear point or purpose behind any of these fights. It just looks like they needed to fill some slots, so they threw some names together. Ideally, what you would do with those undercard slots is use them to showcase your up-and-coming talent. But there's nothing up-and-coming about Robert Guerrero and Victor Ortiz.
Jesus Christ.
I can't even tell you, looking at this card, which one of these fights is supposed to be the chief support. And I'll take you back to a couple of years when Floyd Mayweather Jr. took on the then unbeaten Canelo Alvarez. The chief support for that fight was the Danny Garcia versus Lucas Mathise fight. Take you back to the Maypac card, the big Maypac fight. On the undercard of that, you had up-and-coming talent like Vasyl Lomachenko. You had solid fights like Brad Solomon versus Adrian Granados. Leo Santa Cruz, he fought on that card.
It was a solid card all around.
This undercard, this is a far cry from that, let me tell you. And the most it accents is the sheer lack of quality control over there on PBC Isolation Island. Look at what they got going on this weekend. Michael Polite Kofi versus Jonathan Rice. It's nothing against Michael Polite Kofi, unbeaten heavyweight contender Michael Polite Kofi, but I reiterate here what I said before. He's not at a place where he should be headlining cards.
Is this stable starting to thin out or something?
Where's Keith Thurman? Where's Gary Russell Jr.? This would be a prime opportunity for those guys to make a ring appearance and remind people what they can do. Where are these guys? Or is it that they've grown too fat and happy
on hiatus,
on holiday, that they're not going to get off the couch unless it's for a big fat check? And they're not going to get a big fat check for foregone conclusion fights and filler fights. If you want the big money, you need to be involved in a big fight. And these guys don't seem to want to do that. I don't know. What this accents to me is an overall lack of quality control on PBC Isolation Island. They'll just put any two guys together
to fill the slots.
And finally, a bit of news that broke earlier today, per tweet from Michael Benson by way of Dan Raphael. Vasyl Lomachenko versus Richard Comey is reportedly likely for December 11th. And my reaction as a boxing fan, yes, I like that fight. I like this fight, and I like the fight that could have made before it. The fight with Devin Haney. We know that there was some back and forth between them, and we also know that Devin Haney needs opponents, quality opponents, and Richard Comey would have been just that. But if Richard Comey has set his sights on someone else, someone who's just as, if not more of a credible threat to him, no, I won't complain, because Vasyl Lomachenko isn't a walk in the park for either Devin Haney or Richard Comey. I understand Devin Haney's situation. I don't blame him for it. I understand why his resume appears thin to so many people. It's because of stuff like this. It's because people keep choosing to go the other way. But you'll excuse me for saying so. You don't duck Devin Haney to fight Vasyl Lomachenko. That's not how that works. Vasyl Lomachenko is a threat to Richard Comey, the same way that Devin Haney might have been interpreted as being a threat to Richard Comey. You know, what makes a duck, a characteristic duck, and according to Hoyle duck, is when you avoid a hard fight for an easier one, and that's definitely not what's happening here. We saw how Vasyl Lomachenko looked in his last outing against Masayoshi Nakatani. He battered Nakatani worse than Teofimo did.
I don't think Richard is ducking Devin.
No, I wouldn't call it that. Devin Haney himself reacted to the news by asking Richard Comey, what was the point?
Because Richard's the one that called out Devin.
He's the one that expressed an interest. He's the one that expressed all the enthusiasm over that potential matchup. And now he seems to have shifted his focus to a Lomachenko fight. You know what? Maybe when he called out Devin, there wasn't anything on the table, and then the Lomachenko fight was presented to him, and he took it.
It could be that simple.
No, I myself would not call this an according to Hoyle duck. What I would call it is a good fight for Vasyl Lomachenko and Richard Comey, and a tough break for Devin Haney.
You know, Luke Campbell retired.
Earlier today, it was announced that Cool Hand Luke decided to call it a career, and with news like that and news like this, the pool of options for young Heaven Daney in the lightweight division really is thinning out. Teofimo's still all tied up with George.
We know.
Jojo, who knows what the hell he's going to do? Is he going to fight Devin or is he going to fight Ryan? We're hearing this news that Vasyl Lomachenko is going to be fighting Richard Comey, so Devin's running out of options. Maybe Devin should leave the lightweight division. Maybe it's time to move up. Maybe it's time for Devin to go to 140, integrate himself into those ranks so that he can pick up a world title after Josh Taylor moves up, because it doesn't look like Josh is going to stick around. After that Jack Catterall fight, he might go up to 147, fight Terrence Crawford. When he does, somebody's going to have to pick up those alphabet titles.
Devin might need to start on that now.
Forget about the lightweight division, because nothing's going on for you there. It might be time to take your business and your skills elsewhere.
Time to make a power move.